Jesus placed his strong and loving arms about me, and he led me in the way I ought to go. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cared for me. Every day he comes to me with new assurance. More and more I understand his words of love. But I'll never know just why he came to save me, till someday I see his blessed face above. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cared for me. You're released to class. That's on. Hey, there we go. All right. You offered it to me. I just turned it down. That's on me. So last week, we looked at this question, which is one of the toughest questions that man wrestles with. Why is there pain and suffering in the world? And last week, we discussed that despite what the skeptics may say, the existence of suffering and evil and pain in the world does not necessarily, or that does not challenge the presence or the sovereignty of God in the world. Because God exists apart from evil, Jesus fully shared in human suffering, and even with an all-loving, all-good, all-powerful God that's in control, sometimes pain is even necessary to accomplish a greater good. We looked at Dr. Peter Kraft's bear trap analogy last week. Remember, so there's a bear that's got his paw stuck in like a steel trap out in the woods, and a man walks up on him. And the process of the man humanely freeing the bear from the trap, from the bear's perspective, is actually pretty terrifying, because the bear is shot with a tranquilizer gun. The bear is paralyzed and maybe in and out of consciousness, and that, like, for the bear, that's an extremely confusing, scary, and painful experience, but the bear lacks the perspective and the understanding to know the greater good that the man is doing for him. And so we, like the bear, often lack perspective in our lives to understand what God is doing in our lives that is for our ultimate good. And sometimes that can also be painful and confusing and scary for us. And so that doesn't mean that just because there is suffering in the world that there is not an all-good, all-loving, all-powerful God that is still in control and sovereign over what's happening. And so the ultimate point that we came to last week, and it's the point that really God ultimately makes to Job at the end of Job's story, is that this world is not designed to prevent suffering, but God is still in control of this world, and we have to trust him. And so it's good for us to know why suffering exists in the world, but tonight we're going to talk about how to deal with suffering when it comes to us. It's the practical application. And so tonight we're going to look at some biblical truths that both provide perspective and provide purpose for us when we endure hardship in our lives. Let's see if it's connected. There we go. All right, have you ever played this game? All right, so this is the interactive part right here, okay? So we'll start with a little would you rather. All right, would you rather always have wet socks or always have a small pebble in your shoe? Okay, raise your hand if you say wet socks all the time. Raise your hand if you say pebble in your shoe all the time. All right, and Chet abstains, okay? All right, next question. Would you rather have one really bad day every month, or would you rather have a month of small inconveniences every day? Who wants to take the one really awful day every month? Just rip the Band-Aid off. All right, who wants to have constant inconveniences every day? Okay, we got a few hands. More people want to rip the Band-Aid off, okay? All right, next one. Would you rather endure a hardship that everybody can see, or would you rather go through one that no one else notices? Who wants the super obvious hardship that everybody else can see? Maybe? A couple? Who wants the hardship that you're going through alone because nobody else can see it? All right, so we'd rather kind of suffer in privacy. But there's a few people that would rather have it out in the open. So the point here is that everything from small inconveniences like wet socks to large hardships like suffering alone and nobody else can help you, all hardship is kind of relative to us as people, right? We are constantly comparing and weighing the relative importance of things or the relative severity of things in our lives. It's, college football season is upon us, and like every year, what's everybody that's a college football fan getting excited about right now? Like when something comes out, what's everybody looking forward to seeing? Yeah, it's like the preseason rankings. Daryl, are the preseason rankings good for anything? Do they mean anything at all? Do they ever last like 4 weeks of the season? But do we all still complain about it when we see the first rankings, right? They're pointless, but we like to prioritize, we like to rank, we like to relate one thing to the other. This is better, this is worse. And to a degree, we as people, we kind of have to, in our lives, like we have limited time each day to do the things that we have to do. So we have to prioritize. We have to figure out what is better, what is worse, what is more important for me to spend my time on, what's less important for me to spend my time on. So it's kind of like the nature of the world that, to a degree, we sort of have to do that. In a legal sense, we also kind of rank, like if somebody is charged with criminal charges, you can be charged with a felony or a misdemeanor, right? What's the felony for? Yeah, like the felony charge is like something that's pretty serious. What's the misdemeanor charge? It's like more minor, like less consequential. And so, we see like even in the legal system, we kind of rack and stack like what's bad versus what's really bad. And we also, of course, tend to do the same thing with hardship in our lives. Don't we often compare our trials to something that other people are going through? Or maybe we compare some hardship that we're dealing with to something that we've previously dealt with in the past. How could comparing suffering actually be a healthy practice? Yeah, so with life experience comes perspective that allows you to maybe help somebody else. What are some other ways where maybe comparing suffering might actually be a healthy or a good thing to do? Yeah, maybe it kind of forces you to like look outward. You realize that you're not alone, and like you said, maybe you see somebody else that's dealing and dealing well with something that maybe is harder than what you're going through, and so that's like encouraging to you. Like if they can do it, well, then I can too, right? So like that's a good, healthy way. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it helps. It gives you gratitude, perhaps to count. You might think you're going through a hard time, but then maybe when you kind of look at some of the other things going on around you, maybe it actually makes you grateful that, okay, well, it could be worse, and I'm glad that it's not. Okay. So the flip side, now how could comparing suffering be an unhealthy practice? How might that be a bad thing to do? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, it could make you prideful, kind of like put yourself above others, like, or cause you to like downplay, something else. Like that never, who likes a one-upper, right? Like you try to tell somebody like a problem and they're just like, oh, well, wait until you hear about my day. Like that's, like, don't do that. Like that's not helpful. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, oh, sorry, I'm just trying to play back what you're saying. Yeah. But yeah, like maybe you trying to tell somebody about your experience that you went through. It seems like a good thing to do, but maybe for the person receiving it, it's like you're kind of making it about yourself in this moment instead of just being here with me and empathizing with me and my struggles or my late-term pregnancy in the summer, in your example. In July. Yeah, I've never been pregnant in July, and I never plan to be. So it's so it's so we know that oh, go ahead, sorry. Yeah, you could basically become a Debbie Downer, and instead of help, you might be thinking that you're helping, but you could kind of just make it worse and worse by piling on. And so we know that we tend to, view our things in terms of comparison, but God doesn't view things the same way, okay? God is not constrained by the same things that we are. We talked about how we have to prioritize, we have to compare because we're limited by, time to do things, but God is not limited by time. So he doesn't really have a priority for what he has to do because he can do everything. In our legal example, we talked about felony versus misdemeanor, but what does God think about sin? Sin is sin. Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. If you sin, you're just separated from God. There's no felony, there's no misdemeanor. It's just, that's kind of how it is. He doesn't necessarily compare those two things. And so, just because we view our suffering as relative, it doesn't mean that God sees any suffering as trivial. What it means is our suffering is never ignored. If you would open up to Mark chapter 5, it's a bit of a longer reading. Could somebody read Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43? Verses 21 through 43. All right, go ahead, Chet.
Mark chapter 5, starting at 21. And when Jesus had crossed
through 43. Keep going. Yep.
While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, but he put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was about 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them not to give her, and told them to give her something to eat.
Thank you for that. All right. So once again, would you rather have a painful terminal medical condition, or would you rather have a dying child? Who would rather be in the position of the woman with the terminal medical condition? All right. Is there anybody here who would like to be in Jairus' position with a dying daughter? 0 hands, okay? So we can all agree that both problems are bad, but one certainly seems worse to us, right? And so when Jesus is on his way to Jairus' house and then he stops and says, "Who touched me?" You know, the disciples say, "Hey, we're in this big crowd. Why are you saying, 'Who touched me?'" What do you think the disciples also might be thinking in this moment? Yeah, but think about what they're going to do. Ricky? Yeah. Yeah, what do you think Jairus is thinking when Jesus stopped and he's like, "Hey, who touched me out here?" Like, yeah, you're probably even more than impatient, but if I'm Jairus, if I'm the father here, I'm probably furious. I'm like, my kid is dying. Why are you stopping to figure out who touched you right now? So just like we all raised our hands and said, hey, Jairus kind of has the worst deal here. The disciples are probably also thinking the same thing, but Jesus still stops, right? So what this shows us is that both Jairus and the woman were of equal importance. Both of their suffering is of equal value to Jesus because he stops and he takes the time to engage with the woman while he's on the way. He doesn't, and again, he's not bound by time. He knows what's going to happen, but Jesus makes time and effort for both of them when it probably wouldn't make sense to anybody else that was there that he was doing that. And again, it's getting back to the bear trap analogy of the disciples just lack the perspective to understand the greater good that God is working. And ultimately, it does result in a greater good because the girl does die. And then rather than Jesus just performing a healing miracle, which he's done, he performs a miracle of resurrection, which is further pointing to the proof of the fact that Jesus is God in the flesh. And so if suffering is relative to us, but it's not trivial to God, what does this mean for how we should view our own suffering when we're going through something? What are some of the implications or the applications for us when we're dealing with a hard time? And as people that by nature tend to kind of compare what we're dealing with to others. What does that mean for you? Don? Yeah, it's powerful reassurance. Like I like the way that you said, the powerful reassurance that the Lord hears us, that God cares about what we're going through. Any other thoughts on that? Gant? Yeah. Yeah, it's like what we're talking about right now is like perspective, and that is a huge part of the perspective is that, yeah, suffering is temporary, and we have a promise that there is something better for us that God has in store. Yeah, I think the big takeaway is it doesn't matter what you're going through. We shouldn't minimize any suffering that we're dealing with in our lives. If it matters to you, then it matters to Him, so you should bring it to Him. Ricky. Yeah, well, I really appreciate you bringing that up because I hadn't even really thought of it that way, but put yourself in the perspective of the woman. And of course, in the story, she doesn't know what Jesus is doing. She just sees him in the crowd and wants to go touch him. If the woman knew what Jesus was on his way to do you think that she might have changed what she did? No? Still would have, some people are saying yes, and I don't know, and this is pure speculation, but and this is getting back to the very point that I'm trying to make of like, we have a human tendency, maybe some people, if you're in that situation, you don't want to hold up Jesus because you're like, well, I have a problem, but he's going to save somebody from dying, so like, I don't want to stop him, right? Like we all raised our hands, and we said that one was worse than the other. If the woman viewed it the way that we all just said that we did, where Jairus' problem is worse, and then we don't take that to Jesus, then she doesn't get healed. But she just went and touched him, and then she got the relief that she needed, and Jairus was still taken care of too. And so the point is, like, it is worth taking everything to him because he'll take care of all of it. You don't need to downplay or minimize anything that you're going through because you think that maybe God has bigger fish to fry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then the faith of a person to not have any sort of expectation of necessarily interacting with Jesus, but like if I clip his clothes, then that's all that I need. Yeah. 1 Peter chapter 5, in verses 6 and 7, he writes, "Cast all your cares upon him." And so I think what that means you should cast your, I'm running late because I'm stuck in traffic on him, if that's bothering you. That also means that you should cast your really bad diagnosis that you just received on him equally as well, because those two things are equally valid to God, because if you care about it, then he cares about it. We need to trust him with everything.
It's interesting, David. Spent my working years working in healthcare, and we've got this concept of triage. You guys talk about that in the military?
Oh, yeah.
The severity
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that gets back to the point of like, yeah, if you're assessing casualties, we set up like a triage triangle, right? And you put like the routine, the urgent, and then the expectant. You separate them, and we're saying, hey, this is 1, 2, 3, and this is how the order that we're going to deal with them in. But God doesn't view it that way. I think He would put all of us in the urgent category. And so God does not compare our suffering. He doesn't trivialize it. God in His compassion assures us that our suffering is not ignored, which is the perspective that we need. But next, God in His wisdom ensures that our suffering is not wasted. All right, here's the purpose. What purpose can suffering serve in your life? Yeah, you said that. I mean, Ricky basically just said like that's his superpower. Is he's suffered through a lot. He's been through a lot of things, and when he goes and interacts with other people, that's something that that's perspective that he can bring to help somebody else. Thank you for sharing that. What else? What purpose does suffering provide in your life? Could you read that for us? Yeah. What is seen, what you're dealing with is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. All right, well, oh, yep, yes, ma'am. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can use it to help others, and the way I like the way you said it, where it forces you to turn to God, and it brings you closer to Him. I think that's probably like the biggest benefit of it. Kind of like we'll look at kind of the flip side of this question. What do you learn in the good and easy times in your life? What do you learn when things are going great? Okay, hopefully. Be thankful. What'd you say?
I learned nothing.
Learn, yeah.
When it's going good, I forget who's person to me. When it's going great, I eventually forget to keep my eyes on it because, this is easy, I'm running easy, the race isn't being hard. And then that's when I fall, when I think I got it figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of gets you into this false sense of security, like you've got it figured out. When you have when you're just living in comfort or you have a lot of success, that's basically like reinforcing to you, like, hey, just stay the same. This is going well, unless you're consciously thinking otherwise. But it can lull you into a false sense of security, and then you start to just trust in yourself and trust in, hey, like the things that I'm doing are good, and I'm comfortable here. And basically, like, comfort just kind of tells you to stay the same. I don't think this thing is charged. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, and in it there's this quote that says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And it's like everything that we've all been saying. There are some lessons that you can only learn through hardship. There are some things you can only learn when you have no choice but to turn to God and trust in him, because there's nothing else you can do. You cannot trust or rely on yourself anymore.
I was just going to say, having been a social worker for like 30 years, I want to empathize, but the best foster parents are the ones who are foster kids. The best social workers are the ones who are actually in the system. And I think it's the same with evangelizing. The best evangelists are those who have been forgiven the most. And so I just think it's having experience that gives us, like you said earlier, a superpower.
Yeah.
Just so much more empathy.
Yeah, a lot of these lessons you can't learn unless you live it yourself. You can read about it in a book, but you can't fully empathize or understand what somebody is going through unless you've lived that yourself. You kind of lack that perspective. Our suffering reveals our weaknesses, it reveals our flaws, it exposes us, and it also calls us to action and to growth and ultimately to trusting in God, because it draws us near to him. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5 tells us that not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. James writes in chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." If you just, between what Paul wrote in Romans and what James wrote right there, what kind of person do you think that they're talking about? How would you, maybe in one word, how would you describe the person that embodies those two passages right there? Maturity. Yeah. Spiritual maturity. Yeah, I think that's great. What else? What other word comes to mind when you think about the person that embodies those? Perseverance. Absolutely. Discipline. Yeah. 100%. Anything else? I think of toughness. I just think of a tough person that just gets knocked down over and over again, keeps getting back up. What are traits of tough, strong, resilient people that persevere? What are traits of people that are like that? What do you see them do? Empathy, okay. Yeah, kindness, because it's not always easy. Patience, yeah, kind of like the discipline to just sort of deal with it, What else? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's because they had that kind of character where nobody wanted to leave. When I think of toughness, I think of calluses. Does anyone have them on their hands? All right. When a few years ago, I had a strength and conditioning coach that was really into kettlebell training. I don't know if you've ever used kettlebells, but I had not trained with them a lot before, and my coach had this thing where it was the 100 kettlebell snatch test. And a kettlebell snatch is where you take the weight from the floor, and in one movement you snap it over your head, and then you just swing it back and forth over and over again. And so his test was how fast can you do 100 kettlebell snatches? And so the first time I did this test, I mean, it just kind of breaks you. But when I was done, I looked at my hands and I just had flaps of skin and like my fingers, my palms just completely exposed because like I'm an Army officer. Unlike the enlisted guys, like I don't actually work for a living. I've got soft hands, right? And so like it ripped all the skin off of my hands and it was painful for days after that. And the body is amazing because when your skin senses friction on it, it tells you that, hey, there's like a risk of injury. And when you're swinging the kettlebell is the handle is rotating in your hands, that way it's like pulling and ripping and tearing on your skin. And your body's response to that stimulus is to produce a protein called keratin. It's what's in your fingernails, it's what's in your hair. It's this tough, fibrous protein, and your skin starts to produce it, and it makes your skin hard, it makes your skin tough and resistant to that same stress. But it is the stress, it is the friction that forces your body to grow in that way. Your body responds not by like shying away from it, but it basically leans into it, like I'm going to harden you against this stress that you're going through. Yeah. Yeah, that was after. If you don't use it, you lose it. But the point is that you don't get tough unless you have that friction. You don't get tough or build toughness unless you live under stress. And so we talked about like what are traits of a spiritually tough person, but like what do you think the defining trait of a spiritually tough person is? Faith. Humility. Yep. Consistency, kind of getting back to the discipline. What else? Determination. Unconditional love. I would say it's trust, faith. But when I think of like a spiritually tough person, I think of an unshakable trust, hope, confidence in God. And I think of a complete reliance on God gives you a character that is built for eternity. No matter what you go through, a spiritually tough person just trusts in God. They don't trust in themselves. They don't trust in anything else. They're just like, God has this. I think that is a defining trait, the defining trait, in my opinion, of what spiritual toughness is. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Paul is talking about trusting God in every situation, and he doesn't really care what bad thing happens to him, because when he's weak, then God is at his strongest. And so we need to learn to suffer and endure with purpose. So when we're going through hard times, maybe some good questions to ask ourselves are, how can my present circumstances or challenges cause me to deepen my trust in God? How is this hard time that I'm going through push me closer to Him? In this moment, what does full reliance, what does full trust in God look like? How can I live that out when I'm going through something? When you're in that moment, how can I really practice that? And so God assures us that our suffering is not wasted. And then lastly, your suffering is not forever. Jesus says in John chapter 16 and verse 33, "In this world you will have trouble, but I have overcome the world." Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." Just a few years ago, this little thing happened called COVID, right? Did anybody feel like they suffered, whether or not you actually had COVID? Did anyone kind of feel at least minor inconvenience for a couple years? And then some people actually really did suffer, right? But like for everybody, like it changed our lives. And like in the moment, did anybody particularly like that, right? In the moment, didn't it feel like it was going to last forever? Because I mean, it went on for a couple years, but churches stopped meeting, we went virtual, it disrupted our lives, and it kind of seemed like it was never going to end. Does COVID seem like it was yesterday anymore? That seems like a lifetime ago, right? I mean, it's been like 5 years, but 5 or 6 years, but like that was 6 years ago. But like in the moment, it seemed like this is never going to end. And it's really not all that long ago in the grand scheme of things. But now we don't even feel like it was, like now we feel like it's like way in the past. And so now just like think about things on an eternal scale. Like if that's how insignificant COVID feels to us now, just 5 years later, like, oh, that was a long time ago. Whatever we're dealing with in this life, it's really just like a blip on the scale of eternity. Paul continues in chapter 8, verse 28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And so when he says that all things work together for good, that means that the bad things work together for good, the painful things work together for good, the shameful things work together for good, the incomprehensible things work together for good for those who love the Lord. And so tough times don't last, and it's kind of cliche, but like, how does the phrase end? Tough times don't last. Tough people do, right? About a month ago, we took a vacation to North Cascades National Park, and we saw this sign along the trail. I didn't get this from the internet. I actually took this picture. It's in a national park, so you know this is real, what I'm about to tell you. But the plaque, if you can't read it, says, when water is plentiful, trees save energy by growing shallow root systems. As more water and nutrients are needed, the root mass becomes wider and more dense. While it's easier to build, this weak foundation also makes the trees more likely to be pushed over by strong winds. And so if you're like walking around like the North Cascades or out in the Olympics, like don't you see all these trees all the time that are like these big trees with the roots exposed? And if you look at them, yeah, the roots are kind of like shallow, spread out. They never really got that deep because it was really easy for them to get water. The trees, basically, like they didn't have to struggle to survive. They didn't have to work hard to get water, to get nutrients. They never had to really grow deep. And so we don't really get storms around here. Like we get windstorms. Like it doesn't thunderstorm a lot. Like where I'm from, like we don't get tornadoes, at least in this part of the state. But like here, you have these massive trees and the winds just blow these big trees over because like they didn't have to struggle. It's counterintuitive, but it's the trees that struggle for the water and the nutrients that are the same trees that stand tall in the storm. And so tough times don't last, but tough people do. It's not just human nature, like in our calluses on our hands. It's the nature of everything that God has created, that the tough times makes everything in this world stronger. And it's no different with our spirit. It's God's design for life in this imperfect and dangerous and wild world that is not designed to prevent our suffering, but the suffering that we live with is the thing that makes us strong, that makes us trust and rely on God. And so life is hard, and that's a good thing, because our suffering is not ignored, it's not wasted, and it's definitely not forever. Our pain and our struggles in this life deepen our trust in God, and they help us to develop a character that's fit for eternity. And we can't fully enjoy a life of reliance on God in the next world if we never learn to rely on Him in this one. Yeah, basically the nature of life is if you want to survive, you kind of have to be able to take beatings and keep going, whether you're a caterpillar, whether you're a person. Any other thoughts, right? Amen. Dan?
I think that we can see there are some things that are more important to God, some things that are greater treasure to Him. He rewards us accordingly. Apostle Paul wrote that in the church of Corinth, that their works were going to be tried as if by fire. The fire itself will reveal whether they're gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or stubble. Man's work survives that fire, he will get his pay. According to the Bible, it's the same word, but it's 3/4 pay. If they are burned up, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved as one escaping through the flames. So we have these different things. There are different levels of importance to God. And if we choose the important things, He will reward us accordingly.
Absolutely. Don? Yeah, going through tough times kind of, it calls you to rise to that challenge, to be more resilient, to keep going. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, over the last 3 years, me and my sister have always had a wonderful relationship, but we've grown even closer over the last 3 years, and I've done nothing but the last 45 minutes of think about her as we've been talking, as she's been suffering with cancer over the last 3 years. But and I think about the word toughness, and I see some people in my life that look tough, that look like they can do things, but they also look like it's God. When I look at my sister, every single time you see a picture of my sister is smiling because she still knows she belongs to, and she is trying to present the image of a child of God. And so that, in my mind, shows just how tough a person she is. So I've been thinking about her a lot, and I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, that's the difference that perspective can make. You know, there's tough people that just kind of like deal with stuff, but like they look like they've been through the ringer and they kind of act like it too. But then there's people that are going through the same thing, and you would have no idea. They're just acting like everything is okay, and it's because they have that perspective and because they trust in something other than themselves. Yep. Let's close with a prayer. Father, we come to you tonight just thankful for this world that you've placed us in, for all the good things that we get to experience in it, and though we can't always understand it, I pray that you would help us to appreciate even the hard things, to have the presence of mind to turn to you in those times, not to rely on ourselves, but to seek to trust you deeper when this world is hard, when it's challenging, when we're going through suffering and pain in this life. Father, we praise you and we thank you that you care about it all, that you don't ignore any suffering, that you don't trivialize anything that we're going through. I don't understand how you can care about every little thing, how you can see everything that happens on this earth, and how you can know what's in all of our hearts and know what we're going through, whether it's seen or unseen, but you know and you care. Thank you for always listening, for always being there for us. And thank you for giving us purpose, even when we can't see it, when we don't know what the ultimate good is that we're working. We thank you that through hardship, through trial, through stress, comes growth, comes strength. And I pray that as we endure hard times, that we wouldn't ask simply that it would just be taken away, but that you would help us to have the maturity to embrace the challenges that you're giving to us, that you would allow us to grow through those experiences. And like we've heard tonight, that we can use those to help others, to provide perspective to other people they're going through hard times, and that our struggles, that our weakness, like Paul describes, can become our superpower to help and be a light in this world. And part of the reason that we can be a light in this world is because we know that this world is temporary, and everything in it, including the suffering, it's not forever. And we're thankful that you've given us a finish line, that you've given us a goal, that there is an ultimate reward, and that whatever we do in this life is just a blip on the scale of eternity. And we have hope and we have confidence that we'll spend that with you if we can endure to the end. Father, I pray that when the hard times come, that you will give us strength, that you will give us your Spirit, that you will give us other Christians to help lean on and get through those difficult times, so that we can all reach the finish together. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.